An old archive that exists and a new one, defining a space between where you can hold lessons, and a wall around so that the elephants can't knock your vault down. And a research entity, which is this building here with photovoltaic cells and water, defining a courtyard with a fantastic view. Okay? And this is a church which defies gravity, which the original church has not been built, but Diane and I were the only white people at a congregation of 10 million Africans at the Church of Zion, and they're interested in building it. So you keep trying. You don't give up. And then this is a site that I'm working on at the moment. It's a quarry that overlooks the southern African coast. It's a piece of damaged landscape. This landscape here is where, at a certain point in time when there was the Ice Age, a small group of Homo sapiens kept our species alive through a fantastic relationship with seafood. And we've just found a new species of plant here, which is lodged with Q. Off here is where David Attenborough with Jacques Cousteau's son filmed the Sardine Run for his movie series. And this village here is where the Griqua, who are the First Nation people linked to the Khoisan, have their headquarters. So we are making them the custodians of this coast. And these are my drawings of the coastline. And this is a recent design that I've done, and that's the relationship with the cliff. Okay? And you come in and you ramp round into a place where you have a place of seclusion, and then you have the story of the sea and the plants. And this is a plant institute at the conceptual stage. I finished this drawing just before I left for the airport. What it's doing is showing the building like a fossil in relation to a bigger landscape. And the building is something that's built out of the stone of the quarry, one material, and you can't date it. Has it always been there? It's very nice to have buildings that are like that. But through making love to the landscape through your drawing and your Lamy pen, you get a better understanding of that. And then this is the first women's center in Africa, showing 3,000 embroideries of how women have overcome struggle. You take the pot that women are buried in, you take the egg as a metaphor for developing an idea. Okay? Yet has to have money. And then, in conclusion, intuition and imagination, assessing the source. Johanni Palasma's book on the architecture of neuroscience. He's almost proved, the recent booklet, that 90 to 95% of what we do is intuition. Now, your library of your computer has no record or access to your intuition. So you've got to find a way of accessing it. I do it through drawing, because you end up into a communication with it. Also, 90% of your experience spatially is from your autobiography. It's also not in the library. So how do you do personal work if you don't access that? Find a way of accessing it, because fact is a small part of it. Okay? And I draw. When I go somewhere, I draw. And in the Women's Center, odd things happen, because the armpit of David, sketched in Florence, becomes a detail in the Women's Center, because that's how your intuition works. Intuition is access to the source. Whether it's through Buddha or whether it's through Moses, it doesn't matter. It's the access to the source. Okay? Florence in the rain. Construction, proportion. Once you draw this, it's indelibly part of your mind, and you have to make a decision when you pick up the piece of paper. Am I going to draw a sliver of it because it's a Lamy? Am I going to do the panoramic view? And then am I going to render it on the aeroplane, or am I going to render it now? Okay? And why am I drawing? Here you're in another culture. You're suddenly in Ethiopia, where you have the column on axis outside defining a sacred space, and the carving out of a landscape at Lalibela. And then you go into a peasant's house and you record their lifestyle. But what you do is, most importantly, you draw the plan and the section. It doesn't take long. Okay? If I took you into the communities of your old town here, in an hour and a half, we could divide students up and we could develop an intimate knowledge about plan and section of that piece of environment. the Flower House in Chicago. You're traveling up the Niger and the symbolism of the tree and the anthill in Dogon culture, and a mosque which is not accessible, but it's, and my son was with me and he drew the urban planning and the plan of the surroundings, and I did the building. And then the sacredness that it means to other people from another culture. Here it's a shaman, and this is his sacredness, and there's this snake going into a hole. It's about something else that we need to have reverence for. And I've just been, you know, in Finland, where the quality of light is something that's understood, but there's also something about Japan there. What's that about? And how do you, when you go to a parting soul because they've died, do you have the shadows of the trees coming through and the light fitting that hangs down? And how do you go into, I mean, this is the space of Ruzavori. Ruzavori means, imagine being an architect and your name is the Mountain of Roses. And you walk into this cube in Helsinki, and at the end here, you've got a little drop of water that drops, and it echoes through the space. Today, Ando went and spent 3 weeks here and changed his whole career. It's good to travel, because the whole thing of travel is it informs you in a different way. There's the water that's dropping down. There's the section. That's how it's made. The water fills up at the top of this, and it dribbles down there, and then it comes down here, and it goes here, it goes bloop, and it echoes through the space. Beautiful things. One of the greatest spiritual experiences. And then the weight of these black floating chairs is just beautiful in the space. And then the floating staircase that he does. And then you walk through Alto in the morning, and you look at a balustrade, and you look at the fun he has as an escape door in his studio so he can get away from bad clients. And then you look at Levitska, who's a colleague of his, who uses the floating planes. I don't think he could ever do it. And there are people like Glenn Murcutt who've gone to Finland and they've launched a whole career for themselves as Australians, because it's how they've reinterpreted that back in the situation they're in and invested it with new meaning. So you've got to reinterpret. And in conclusion, one who begins his inquiry with fact will never arrive at the essence of something. That's Sartre. It's a quotation out of Johanni Palasma's writings. So, you need to engage with your intuition. You need to not be scared. You need to be proud of who you are as Thai people. You need to engage with who you are. The world is waiting for you. Don't stop looking abroad. Don't start traveling abroad. Don't stop that. But it gives you a better understanding of who you are when you get back here. And that's my concluding message to you. And then as an architect, the world's your oyster. You can make your own clients. It's no longer just who you know, or who you know as opposed to what you know. And we had a wonderful example of John Lin, who's someone from your Asian world who's created a whole career, but he needed to move away and marry a Dane to realize that he could go back to where he was, or wasn't, the other, and create a whole new world for yourself. And it's an extremely exciting, wonderful place. So there's a huge future for young architects, but we need good architects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter Rich, for a terrific lecture and a very, very impressive drawings. Now I would like to ask Ajahn Tonkao Panin, the moderator for this session.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful and inspiring lecture. It's so amazing. I was listening and I wonder, how could you deliver such a lecture with energy and without stopping at all? We were
It's a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we get into our discussion, can I just ask you a really stupid question? Because I was wondering, how do you spend your day? I mean, what's your daily activity? Because you have so much energy. And
Ask my wife. I drive her crazy.
He just draws? So you
I draw, and then for therapy, I throw the ball for my poodle. And it's fun.
So you're constantly working
I work at home. We work small. We work 3 to 8 people. My son, eldest son, was in my practice for 8 years. He's now gone on his own, and he's doing his own work with his own clients. And we
So he's not no longer with you?
No, we're collaborating. He's psychically with me because he and I think the same. And then I have but he's like my wife, so I get on well with him. My second son's like me, so he's working with me. It's not easy, but he's learning, and then he will go on his own. But we don't need to engage new staff because we just pull with my Rwandan office together, and we can be 12 people. And we're having this conversation across 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds.
So you have these many generations in your
and it's alive and active, and I've had to learn to be more collaborative. When I went to MIT about 15 years ago, I showed my work, and Edward Allen, who's a wonderful man who's got Parkinson's disease, he said to me, "But you teach at university full-time and you have one assistant, and you've done 200 times more work than the community department of MIT. How do you do it?" I said, "Well, we just do it. You seem to talk about it. We just do it." Yeah.
This is the first time that we listen to an architect from South Africa. So how do you see yourself and your work in relation to other South African architects?
My generation had the advantage because we were 60s kids and we were questioning and fighting, and we were sort of born into an oppressed society. We became activists. So we have a 50-year advantage over a lot of people by the whole social program is just natural to us. It's not something that the world seems to, since the year 2000, woken up to this new idea that, oh my God, you can do social architecture. What's a bit embarrassing is some of the developed countries like America, if you do a social project in Africa, you get an award before you've done the project.
Yeah, exactly.
And it all comes out of Anglophile guilt. And we're sort of not part of that. We just do it, and it's just so rewarding. And
you described the year 2007 as your turning point of your career. Can you describe a little bit the differences before 2007 and after?
Well, from 1994, when we became a democracy, one could start engaging with communities in a new democracy in a wonderful way. But I needed to deinstitutionalize myself from the institution. And when I teach now, I teach as a director of programs with other institutions. And I'm busy practicing what I taught as a teacher. So it's good to practice what you preach to see if it works or doesn't work. And I think that's been the change. And then, when we won that World Building of the Year at whatever you think of the World Architecture Festival or not, it changed everything. And we just had a meeting. I know Kanga Kuma was one of the assessors, and when he gave me a hug on stage, he said, "Stay small, don't do what I did." So we had a meeting, and we decided to stay small and to actually choose our work and to attract into our existence the right things. And just speaking to that Hindu goddess of architecture seemed to be the answer. Yes. I need to go and talk to Buddhas here. It's the same message.
Listening to your work and seeing your work, there seemed to be this big, gigantic gap between the kind of work that you're doing, the work that is rooted in indigenous and vernacular developing culture. And on the other hand, there are these works that we see in magazines nowadays, every day. This highly, the work, sort of Eurocentric work from developed world. How do we even begin to reconcile our understanding of these two poles?
I've got the top students from Cape Town and my own university working for me. They've had 3 years undergraduate training. And all of their peers are up in arms because they don't want to just be given Eurocentric examples. They want African examples. The problem is in South Africa, the vernacular architecture's gone. It's gone into a transition where it's just no longer there. It's like Western suburbia. So
it's much similar to Thailand, in fact.
Yeah, yes. So it's not a question of even trying to over-romanticize the problem. And I'm just saying, get back to basic fundamentals. When you go into a house, you give the handshake to the world is what you do with your front gate, and then your front door. And then have a look how people live. And all those norms, the lobby when you go into a space, let all those human values come to bear. and get back to that. And sure, we can look in hindsight. I mean, I've documented about 36 huge settlements and student squatter settlements. I need to put that into a book because it's like the only knowledge that's left of that. So I have all these obligations. And the Ndebele, I've got a book to do on the Ndebele, but we're doing a book on my own work, which will be very much the structure that we've got here. And recently I did an exhibition, and my son curated it, and he went into my archive and discovered projects I'd forgotten about. It was a nice transfer from father to son of a body of work. It's just quite good. I recommend to architects, do a little exhibition of your work, because it makes you sift out what has been of relevance, and is there a story, and is your work so bespoken that it always changes? In some cases it does, because the situation's so different. And then, you know, out of fate comes destiny. My colleague who chose to work with me when his wife was posted to South Africa as part of a British development aid package, he's raised the bar of my work on another level. When we did the Axum project in London, you'd have 35 people. We did it with 5 people, and we had the German archaeologists it was like doing a doctorate. We had them marking us.
Yes.
So it's a big wake-up call. And it's not work, it's all such a pleasure.
I'm not sure whether it's the same with South African context or not, but for us in Thailand, it is so difficult to look at ourselves and to really try to understand ourselves, because we are so much used to looking for models from abroad. I mean,
yeah, well, look, Edward Allen, who I spoke about this is the message in answer to that. He was at I think the Boston College, or it wasn't MIT or Harvard, and he gave a graduate address to his students. And he said, look, you've just done your thesis, your final thesis. The last thing you want is a professor to stand up and set another project for you. But I'm setting another project for you. And he said, your generation looks at about 15 superstars. Stephen Hall, Gary, Rem Koolhaas. They all do non-contextual, outrageous work, and you're thinking, wow, if I want to be known, I need to do that. He said, don't do that. Take 40 years to become a good architect. I mean, even Gary was a good architect up until 1950, and then through contact with, he's still a good architect, but through contact with Oldenburg and some artists, he earned the right to try and do some other things, and he's developed amazingly. And I mean, some, you know, Bilbao and also the concert hall in LA, he has good ones and he has bad ones. Not as many bad ones as Stephen Hall. Yeah. But don't just emulate that, because those guys are dying. You know, it's not sustainable. There's a bigger agenda for architects, but just learn to do good work to start with. Okay.
But it is so difficult trying to communicate this kind of message to students.
Well, students have got to understand, you've got to learn the grammar of architecture. Get hold of Steen Alle Rasmussen's book on experiencing architecture. It's about proportion. And I know you think that's so uncool. You know, we want to wear a baseball cap this way and stand on our heads. You know, it has to do with composition, it has to do with proportion, it has to do with system of measurement, it has to do with regulating geometry, it has to do with architecture is about order, but it's also knowing when to break the order. And then go to Ray Kappe. Write down Ray Kappe, Kappe. He's in his 80s in America. He did one of the houses which would be one of the great houses of the world. He gave 10 points of architecture at the end of a book he did. Read those. I wanted to put them on the screen today, but you can get it on the internet, where he takes you through 10 principles that he believes as an educationist, as an architect, are important.
But so many architectural schools nowadays are not teaching those anymore. They're teaching something so complex and abstract.
Well, they teach it so complex and abstract because the teaching staff have never been designers or construction people. They might have a doctorate, with all due respect, but they don't know how to teach architecture.
That's the case, I'm afraid.
And we've got ourselves cornered, you know. You get students out of American universities who can't even plan. You set them a basic planning exercise. I mean, planning has to do with, It has to do with program, it has to do with movement, it has to do with structure, it has to do with envelope. And the other big mistake that's happened in architecture is computers get you, if you're in a Revit program, you think in form before you resolve plan and section.
Exactly,
You can't be an architect without plan and section. So just do yourself a favor, do plan and section, and you'll be a pretty good architect.
Yes.
And let the form be a result of that.
Yes. And from your work, I mean, there seems to be a close relationship between the thinking and the making, the head and the hand. Your hands are becoming more like a thinking hand. I'm using Juhani Palasma as a term. And so I suppose that the actual drawing and the making of the model, physical models, would be important for you.
Well, that's what was so important about your thesis students the other day. I walked into a thesis and there were these models. You know, you can't fool yourself on a model. You can fool yourself on a computer rendering.
Yeah.
And even the analysis was done in model form. And there's something in the making that's different to the computer thing. If you could combine the two, you must use the computer as a constructive tool. When I went to MIT, there was a big saying on the wall: "Don't let the computer stop you from thinking." You know, it's only a tool for you to be able to. I mean, some of my perspectives that I did, they are 3D rendering that I've drawn over quickly. It's very enabling. Okay, it's different to drawing the thing off the cuff. And I'm not saying that you can't engage your inner self through a computer. You have to do freehand drawing, but at least give it a try to see that you can get there.
And you mentioned to me the other day that it's important for us in developing world and developing country to forget about style, to go beyond the word style. But I've been thinking a lot about that. So I want to ask, is it really possible?
Those Ndebele women, those matriarchs who are literate, showed me how they could go into the little farm towns of South Africa, and they could see a formal garden that was Victorian. They could go and pick up a tray which had the modernist swim bath in Sea Point, Cape Town. They could actually look at a gable that was on a chocolate box, and they could go back and they could take a train ride, and they could go back, and not just through mural art but through sculpture. They could be so inventive and understand the whole business of entry and threshold and multiple threshold. And I mean, they through body adornment acquired the knowledge that a good classicist has. So it is entirely possible, and architecture is inherently part of who we are. We've just forgotten it. Those same Ndebeles, once they became victims of apartheid social engineering, and their social structure wasn't there, and they were put into the government grid, the wall, which was tangible, became a row of bricks. There still was a latent knowledge, but it didn't have the same meaning. And we, in rapid transition, have got to understand how we lose so much about. I mean, when you're in a human relationship, all of you are in relationships in one way or another. When the person you're in a relationship, you're trying so desperately to train them to be what they're not, to be like something else, it's not going to be a good relationship. So why do that in architecture? You know, try and come to terms with who the person is and what they've got to offer, and that type of thing. So be more measured about it. And you know, the questions come to bear. Why do Doshi and Rajay from India go and work for Korb and Khan, then distance themselves, and as workers for those people, do the work that the master would have been proud with? The people who went to study under Khan, 90% of them never grew. They just became acolytes because they weren't questioning.
Yeah, so they just need to be
You've got to, just in a school of
away.
architecture, produce thinking students, because if they're thinking students, they will follow the right course.
Yes.
And especially if they dive in the deep end and do the sort of work that John Lynn is doing.
Yeah,
Because
that's
you
true.
know, it's, and also students think that when you get to our age, you know what to do. I approach every project as a student. Until a few years ago, I'd never done a steel building before, so I had to start with first principles. It must never be too easy. It must be a struggle, because the struggle makes it more worthwhile, because it's interrogative.
That's just so amazing. Yeah. We still have a couple of minutes left. Maybe the audience would want to ask some questions. มีใครอยากถามอะไรไหมคะ ถามได้เลย มีไมโครโฟน มีใครอยากถามไหม วินอยากถามไหม อะไรนะคะ ขอคิดก่อน มีใครอยากถามอะไรไหมคะ เขาอุตส่าห์มาตั้งไกลนะ เลคเชอร์ไม่หายใจเลยอ่ะ
ค่ะก็ขอถามนะคะ
ได้ค่ะ
Thank you very much for coming today. It's very inspiring. Yeah, I almost got lost in materialistic world. Thank you from my heart and soul. Anyway, my question is just simple question. What do you think about current Thai architecture?
I have asked Boon Sam after the conference if I can see his work, and I can see the wonderful work of that young couple who are here. They're 33 years old. Here they are. They're one of your, I believe, one of your better young
Yes.
architects. And then there was also a wonderful man who's a discussant, Chang. He was here. So I really want to see some contemporary work that's good, because I'm just driving in the bus and it's somewhere between Latin America and Asia. And
You're not sure where you
and
are,
I went to a
right?
shopping mall yesterday and I wanted to run away. So I need to engage. I realize the difficulty with when you go to the temples. I really think how you teach. To me, what's more important is that, you know, when I flew into your city, it had these long alleyways and blocks. And the other day, Chewy took us down, and then it became a floating city. And I'm interested to going to interrogate how that as a piece of housing. And then when I drive through the city and there's suddenly a U-shaped building, but the internal courtyard is permutated, and you had a student in thesis who was exploring that. To me, that's where the lessons lie for you as urbanized people. And I haven't traveled, this is the furthest I've traveled outside of the city. So there's something particular here that makes you different to Laos or Vietnam or somewhere else. And it's also got to do with your language. Your language is your culture. And it makes you think differently. So you must value language, and you must, when you do architecture here, you must front door and courtyard, you must use your language names for those things, because it gives it authenticity.
Hi. Thank you for the lecture. I have a question about, I think the students in Southeast Asia and the students in Africa are going on similar paths. I'll wait till she finishes fixing your ear.
Yeah, I can't. Now I can concentrate.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
I think the African students, from when we talked about earlier, they're going down the same path as let's say the Thai students, in that we're trying to shape them to have their own vocabulary. But they haven't been brought up with a Western education and been exposed to Eurocentric architectural history and form making. Is it a struggle for them to kind of reach into their own past and find their own indigenous vocabulary and try to work with a certain type of authenticity for you as an instructor?
I think you need to do both. If you take Bawa as an example from Sri Lanka, it was a huge advantage that he actually did the Eurocentric training, and then he could, in some ways, it's almost like when you go out of the world to be somewhere, you come back, you appreciate more what you've got, and you can be more analytical about it. Our students at the moment are